Welcome everybody to Itential's webinar around extending NSO automation capabilities with Itential. My name is Chris Wade. I'm the CTO with Itential, and I have with me Mike Elbraum, a senior solutions engineer who will be focusing on showcasing the platform and showing the demonstrations today. So with that, just a quick background on Itential. Itential is an intelligent network automation platform, and what we mean by that is we build software applications that support network automation with four key concepts in mind. The first is low code. Network automation sits at kind of the intersection of software development and network engineering and operations, so it's important to have a low code environment that exposes some of these software and development concepts into a drag and drop environment. The second is multi-domain. Our customers are adopting a variety of DevOps platforms, controllers, and orchestrators. And it's key to have an automation platform that can help tie these end-to-end concepts together as our networking services get more complex and traverse both physical infrastructure as well as virtual domains in the cloud. The third is network intelligence. Itential is not a generic automation platform. We have specific network intelligence built for network automation concepts. So as you'll see within the demo, some of the drag and drop boxes on the workflows and some of the pre and post checks that are built within the platform are very specific to supporting typical network activities. So it's this specific network intelligence that we think is key in conjunction with integration of your network facing automation, like we said with the multi-domain concepts. And ultimately we want to expose this through an abstracted northbound API based on having concepts from multiple domains. We're able to provide an intent-based API so that your IT applications don't have to concern themselves with the network implementation details. We're able to provide a very abstracted network API to your IT systems. So with that same concept in mind, we talk about the modern network ecosystem. And what we mean by that is as you look to automate your network, our customers are adopting a number of technologies. We have those listed in the bottom right hand corner. So the first and most prevalent is probably DevOps or NetOps concepts. So as sysadmins and cloud ops folks have been automating their network, with additional plugins, those same concepts have been applied to the network. So we think that's a key pillar that our customers are evaluating. And then the next grouping would be controllers and orchestration concepts, which we're seeing from most network equipment providers today, as well as some generic orchestration vendors. We think this is key to really provide central authority as we virtualize the network and speed things up. The next is intent-based, along with the telemetry and analytics you'll see kind of at the bottom. Those together really provide concepts around closed-loop automation, so getting feedback from your telemetry platforms into your controller and orchestration platform, so you can provide both closed-loop concepts as well as abstracted interfaces through the northbound interface. And then the last two, the network continues to get more cloudy by the day, so integrations with cloud concepts as network functions are being virtualized is important. And then SD-WAN, which is really a great use case, which shows how we can take physical infrastructure, some virtual concepts, and provide innovative services to be consumed by our customers. So as those network technologies evolve, originally we thought there was going to be fewer of these platforms, but we really think it's gone the opposite way in the last 2 to 3 years, where there's been more of an explosion of multiple domains, each focusing on automating their specific concepts. So what Itential provides is integration with each of these platforms and really an end-to-end automation concept that allows you to tie, and it really provides flexibility network facing. So if you want to start off with some DevOps concepts, plug in some orchestration, gather some telemetry, you have flexibility as you innovate with your network automation concepts while providing a very flexible but standardized API into your IT systems. So changes on your network technology stack doesn't ripple through and cause slowdowns or additional cost within your IT platforms. So with that, we'll get into some specific ideas around Cisco NSO, given that's the topic for today's webinar. So we'll show some demos here in a minute, but really it's around building network intelligent workflows. And on the diagram on the right, the green boxes are automated and the blue boxes are manual, which Mike will get into. But each of these are drag and drop on this interface and tied together. So it's kind of these network intelligent concepts being tied together into an end-to-end automation, but expanding and enhancing on NSO's use cases. So a lot of the tasks and network intelligence built within this workflow tie into concepts within NSO, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if you're using commit queues, or if you're using service models, or if you're using device templates, we have full breadth and coverage of most all NSO activities, which is what we're highlighting within this webinar. So whether you want to use it for service provisioning, whether you want to use it for configuration drift and remediation, or you want to use it for device onboarding, or you want to do it for software upgrades, all of these use cases can be supported through Itential and Cisco's NSO, with a vast majority of the concepts being out of the box. So with that, I'll maybe just not go into each of these concepts, but we did think it was important to at least list the variety of the interfaces that exist between Itential and NSO. Maybe a few things to highlight. In the upper left-hand side, we start off with the netconf API. So we're accessing NSO, at the netconf and Yang level, and what that allows us to do is that we don't lose any translation from the Yang being translated into JSON or other concepts. We're able to understand Yang at its native level, so that we can render forms or integrate with complex service models in the most appropriate way. And for things that are not supported by the netconf protocol, we augment that with the JSON RPC API and the REST API, some other APIs that Cisco NSO expands upon. And then there's just a whole host of things, whether it has to do with live exec for some of our MOP templates, or whether it's the kind of integration with authentication or device groups, down to scaling concepts. In today's demo, we have LSA set up just so we can integrate with kind of a more complex architecture, but native support for data chunking and LSA for very large networks. And on the right-hand side, all sorts of model interactions. So whether it's device models or service models, or whether it's any of the commit queue options, or whether it's some of the netconf operations, we have vast support out of the box for the integration between Itential and NSO, which we'll highlight through the demos today. So with that, for the first demo, we left it fairly simple. We'll bolt on a few more integrations for the second demo, but the first one is just an Itential platform hooked up to an LDAP system, so we can do some external authentication. And then through the NSO manager, which houses the logic of interacting with NSO, to an NSO layered services architecture with one CFS node and two RFS nodes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay, so I've gone ahead and logged into our Itential platform. The first thing I'm going to do is to click into device management. What I want to do is show you that there are no active devices connected to our system. And the reason is Itential federates data from lots of different systems. So we have integrations in to different systems where we pull back that data and we do intelligent decisions on those systems. What I can do to connect to our NSO system is I can configure my adapters, whereas by connecting to them, I will federate that data and bring them back to Itential so I can perform actions on them. To connect to the NSO system, fairly simple. I'll go into the adapters page. Notice here we've just got a couple adapters already set up. I've got a pretty base out-of-the-box system. I've got my email connection, some basic AAA, and a little bit of database connectivity for us. What I'm going to go ahead and do is add a new adapter. To save some time, I've gone ahead and pre-configured what I need. We're going to connect this into our CFS, just like we showed in the architecture. It's an NSO adapter, and I'm setting up my connections into the HTTP and the netconf APIs. I'm setting up with a default admin account. I've got an encrypted password, which is why you can't see it. And I'm going to use an authentication strategy of machine. That says I want to use the system user. Later on, I'll show you how to set up a more complex authentication strategy so we can do a little bit of multi-tenancy behavior with leveraging some of NSO's NACM capabilities. Important part to notice here is I'm associating this adapter to the device and service brokers. By doing that association, I'm telling Itential that I want you to associate different device capabilities and service capabilities onto this adapter. We'll see what that looks like later on. To go ahead and connect that adapter, all I've got to do is click on Save, and with that minimal configuration, I've already begun to start federating data into the Itential platform. The next thing I want to do is create an adapter for my RFS. I'll go ahead and click on the Add a New Adapter icon. Again, I've pre-configured this one. Main differences here are different IP address, the IP address to the RFS Paris. Click on Save here, and that adapter has now been connected. And finally, I'm going to click on Add Adapter again, and I'm going to connect into our RFS Atlanta. Again, just a different IP address here. I've gone ahead and saved those. So now, the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure those adapters have connected into those systems. So by clicking into Settings, Systems, Adapters, I can see that the CFS and my two RFS adapters have green lights. That tells me that the adapters have connected into the NetConf API as well as the HTTP APIs, and I now have a full connection into those systems. So what I would expect is when I go over to my device management page, I can see the federation at work. And here I can see that my CFS is associated to the RFS devices, as well as I have CEs, PEs, and cores coming off of both RFSs. Now, being familiar with different NSO capabilities, I would expect that I can do some similar behavior, such as viewing the configuration from CDB, which I can. And I can also go in and do some things like check sync and sync from as needed. Came back green, so it looks like everything's in sync. Just like I can view federation from my devices, as we associated this to our service broker as well, I can go into my service management application and I can see the different services that have been federated onto the platform. Here are the different service points that I am pulling in. I can click on the Itential demo port turnup, and I can see a list of services associated there. And just like in the device page, I can pull back different device modifications here. So next what I'm going to do is to jump back into the adapters. I'm going to go into the RFS Atlanta, and I want to show you how you can use a more complex authentication strategy. I'm going to go ahead and replace the type machine, get rid of that, and associate a dynamic authentication strategy here. This allows me to leverage external authentication. So in a combination with Itential's RBAC capabilities, as well as NSO's NACM capabilities and external authentication, I can come in and log in as a different user. So in addition to the machine credentials to get basic connectivity into the NSO service, I can now come back in as a user associated with my account. So let's notice when I'm staying in here as my Melrom user, I'll click into device management and I have access into all of these devices. However, if I log out of Melrom and I come back in as an engineer user with limited access, I can come in here as engineer CE, log back in. This time I go into device manager and I can see a smaller list of devices. So in here, in my RFS Atlanta, I only have certain access to view these CE devices. And again, that was accomplished through a combination of NACM rules built within NSO CDB, as well as the RBAC capabilities within Itential. So I'm going to go ahead and log back out of this engineer and come back in as my master account where I have more access. Now, the next thing I want to show you is I want to show how we can demo an easy out-of-the-box. I've got a service model built in NSO, and I want to create a service. I want to consume that service from my Itential platform. So what I can do is first I'm going to create a quick form. So I'll go into our form builder application, click on new form, and I'll choose a form. So what I have in this drop down here is a list of the service points that were advertised from the combination of NSOs that I have connected to. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our Itential demo port turnup again. And what I can see on the left is a different list of the Yang leafs associated. So notice the keys next to them. That indicates that it's a key within the Yang model. This is exactly how the Yang is depicted as far as the names of the leafs. So I'm going to drag all of them onto my canvas here, showing a pretty basic form. Now what we've done here is we've essentially created a Yang JSON binding. And if I give it a name, demo-form, I click on save. I now can click the preview icon here, and I have a form. So I've created an HTML interface that can go ahead through its Yang JSON bindings, create a service instance that I can push into NSO using my netconf adapter and create a service instantiation of that service model. Now, this is just a simple wrapper, but I'd like to do something a little more complex. So what I can do here to make this a bit more complex, I can change a couple names. So we'll call this device name. We'll choose the default here. Every time it comes in, it should be gig-e. And you know what, for description, we'll make description required. Click on submit, and I'll go into my IP address. And notice, by the way, here in the field key, we can see the leaf ref back where that belongs, the reference back in the leaf model, and we can also see any tooltips. So the tooltips are going to be the tailf info that gets populated back up here, and I could change that. Let's say this is my IP. So I could change that to the user because maybe the operations user group that has access to this form needs a bit of different info. Maybe I need different constraints against it. Either way, we'll pull in the constraints and everything that's been set in the Yang model. We'll show that up in this form here, and you have the ability to go ahead and add some additional decoration on top. For my regular expression pattern here, I decided to put in an IPv4 address pattern, and I'll say for an error message, you must configure this as an IPv4 address, and we'll make that read only. So you can see here through some additional easy decoration, I'm able to add some additional requirements and restrictions here. Do the same thing here, subnet mask, and I'll put in the same regular expression. So I click update, and now when I click preview, I can see the form has changed a little bit. I've got some required fields, which are denoted by the asterisk. I've got my default set up, and I've got my different restrictions set up with my regular expressions. So form looks good to go. I'll go ahead and close out of here. Now to consume this form and apply it to the service, I'm going to go into my workflow builder application. I'll create a new workflow, and I'll give it a name. So we'll call this one demo workflow. Click on save. What we can see here is a list of options. So I've got my different applications set up, and these applications show integrations into different systems. So what I care about for this demo is going to be coming out of Form Builder. I'll choose a Show Form by Name, drop that on the canvas. I'll just scooch that to the left a little bit. And then I also care about the different service integration. Now, by the way, as you connect to different systems, you have different capabilities in here, and this is where you can really extend your integrations. So traditionally, you have an operations user who has intelligence of what they need to do, and they'll swivel chair into different systems. What you can do here is create lots of integrations into your different platforms and make it really easy for that operations user to connect into different things, whether it's connecting into different NSOs or different ITSM change systems or different integrations into resource management or IPAM systems. This is where you would do it, and you can allow that user to build out these simple automations into the network. So from my service management integration, since I associated that adapter into the service broker, I'm able to do something like a dry run, test instances, and then I can do a view test service to see my dry run, and I can do a save instances to provision my service. Just move that over. Since we're going to just create a simple workflow, that's all I need. I'm creating a green line across these, which is a successful path. And by the way, notice the different colors of the task. The blue ones are manual tasks. That means we want users to embed some information into those tasks and continue the automation process. And the green ones are automated. Those are the network intelligent tasks that understand what tasks they're trying to accomplish and know how to do them in an automated fashion. So typically users will build out a combination of blue-green workflow automations. However, the amount of blue and green depends on the user and how much they want to automate. So we'll start this one for our demo. I'll configure the show form by name. We'll call this one enter data. And I'll associate it to a different RBAC group. So we'll make this one associated to the operations team. Now the form data is going to be the form name. That's going to be the name of the form we just created. And then the instance data is how do we populate this. So if I want the user to type things in, I'll leave it blank. Otherwise, if we want to pass this data in, I can leave that as a job parameter, knowing that when I start this workflow, that information will be passed in and associated to this task. The next task is the test instances. So I'll double click that one and I'll call this my dry run. The instance data here that we're going to pass in through the netconf connection to NSO that we'd like to dry run is going to be the output of the inner data. So very easily, since I've wired these tasks together, my outputs now become available inputs to these next tasks. The options that we can choose here, this is where you can configure things such as the commit dry run, out format XML, out format reverse, and so on. So we're going to take the default behavior and leave it blank, which will give us a native dry run. Viewing the dry run. So to view the dry run, we need to pass in the output of the dry run. Pretty simple. And we'll say that a network engineer has to approve this task. Finally, we come to our save instances task. So this will be our provision task. I'm going to change this to the output of the form. And instance options here, I'll leave it blank again. But this is where you would pass something like with a commit no networking or commit with commit queue. So, but I'll take the default behavior. Go ahead and update that. Now, one thing left to do, this view dry run. The user does have an opportunity to say they don't like the dry run, and they'll go ahead and reject that task. So we'll go ahead and create a reject transition. So if the user network engineer doesn't approve it, we'll send it back to the ops team by creating that red line there. I'll go ahead and click save. I got a green banner back on the bottom, which is telling me that everything has been completed here with no issues to the workflow. Now, users have the option to start that automation from our APIs. They could connect in from different systems, such as something like a ServiceNow system or something like a Netcracker or some other northbound workflow management system. But what I'll do for this demonstration is I'll connect using our service catalog application. I'll go ahead and click Add Service. I'll give it a name, port turnup. I'll choose the service to associate it to, my port turnup. And I'll go ahead and choose which groups have access to the service in the service catalog. We'll make it part of our sales team and our admin and engineering team. And then we'll go ahead and choose all the job groups. And then as far as the form goes, we'll pretty much marry the form we just created to the workflow we just created. Clicking Save here creates a new entry, and if I have the proper permissions, which I believe I do, I'll click into Service Catalog and that should appear. Now this is the same form that we created earlier. Again, no development skills needed. I was able to go ahead and just create this HTML form by dragging and dropping. I'll go ahead and choose a device here. And by clicking the magnifying glass there, I'm able to confirm that that device is actually valid. That was testing it against the leaf ref. Then I'll leave the default setting for the interface type. I'll choose an interface to provision against. Give it a description. And I'll choose a VLAN range I can connect to it. Next, I'll go ahead and provision an IP. And I'll associate a subnet mask here. And again, notice if I have a typo there, I can see that error appear and I'll go ahead and fix it. So now I'll click Submit and OK, and it should start that automation for me. Now to find that automation, again, if I have the right access, coming back into our active jobs here, I'm able to see that job run. I can click into Visualize. And inside of Visualize, I can see in the automation that I built exactly where this is. This step right now from a management view is sitting on the enter data task. Clicking into details with the right permissions, I can work that task. Now I'll go ahead, this is where I have the opportunity as the operations user viewing this task to either make changes to this or leave it as is. Everything looks fine to me, so I'll go ahead and click Submit. As soon as I click Submit, it's going to move into the automated tasks on its own. If I pop back to visualize, I can see where it's progressed. Now keep in mind, we federate a lot of data. So as I click through these tasks, I can see the inputs and outputs of the data that went into the NSO system, as well as the response that we got back from the NSO system, showing the actual dry run. Now this is the kind of data we keep in our system. Like I said, we federate data, so as far as the operations data, different data that lives in those different systems, that's the data we pull in, but the actual data from an auditing perspective, that's the kind of data that we federate. So all these different tasks, at any point in time, we can go back into our database and see what data went in and what data came out. So I'll go ahead and work the task since I have access to that network engineering group. Click on work task. Here we can see the dry run for the service that we're trying to provision. Based on the data we've pushed into that NSO model, here's the dry run we got back out. If I click on accept, we'll take that green path and follow along to attempt to provision this. Looks like the provisioning is completed because I can see my workflow at 100%. Clicking into that task, I can also see the same data went into it. And I can see the output. And it looks like the output says the update was true. We went ahead and hit that RFS Paris, and there were no issues. So going back to visualize, I can see that this workflow has been completed.
Thanks, Mike. Before we get into the second demo, we wanted to touch a little bit on the automation journey that we see our customers going on. So the first step is, people are using the CLI. We still, most reporting from analysts is still that 70+% of changes in the network are done through the CLI. Everybody we talk to is obviously interested in building automation and migrating a majority of your network changes off of the CLI. And with that, the adoption of DevOps platforms to support the network and NetOps, network orchestration, cloud orchestration. We see the kind of the prevalence of multiple both strategies as well as vendors participating in the ecosystem. And from an Itential standpoint, the most important is that we want to use the right tool for the right job, and we also want to provide a abstracted automation concept so that you can use the tool of your choice for the use case of your choice. And we've talked about integration at the API level being extremely important, and we work very hard to have a huge ecosystem of integrations depending upon who you use for IPAM or inventory or CMDB, etc. But when it comes to the network automation platforms, controllers, and orchestrators, we see the adoption of a handful of data modeling languages. So YAML, Yang, and Tosca represent a majority of the data structures that these platforms store internally. So by Itential integrating with these things through their API, it's not just their API concepts, it's also the data structures that are supporting those. So by federating those concepts, we're able to provide that abstracted northbound interface to your IT systems while still supporting that federation concept, which is key because ultimately these controllers and orchestrators are the source of truth for the particular piece of the domain they're responsible for. Whatever the state of AWS is right now, or whatever the status of your network overlay or the status of your physical infrastructure can change quite rapidly, and as we adopt automation, we see the pace of change in the network increase. So we believe it's not just important to have these API integrations, but also federate their data in a standardized way so that we can provide end-to-end automation without any sort of hard-coded integrations between any of these platforms. So now with the second demo, the difference between the first demo, we still have the LSA architecture from NSO facing the network. We've added a ServiceNow platform integration through the northbound interface. We do think it's important you can see how the interaction with your IT system is going to be accomplished. And because this is a little bit more of a complicated use case, we have an external IPAM system to manage the resources associated with this layer 3 VPN demo. And down on the bottom right-hand side, maybe just to highlight these capabilities, some of the things you'll see in this, just because this is a little bit more complicated than the first one, is really focused on zero touch. A lot of times in our demonstrations, we have to put a lot of stopping points in the use case so that there's stuff to show. We really want to focus on zero touch, and any sort of error conditioning needs to be done via fallout. So to build trust up within your organization that these automations are not just going to break the network faster, we have to have appropriate error handling and fallout so that we can have manual kind of interaction on demand when required. And then just some of the more complex, since that's the focus of today's webinar, talking about modular child job inclusions, talking about the different looping mechanisms, depending upon whether you want to do a port turn up for 1 or 1,000. How do we accomplish that within a single workflow if that's the desired outcome? And then some of the commit queue options with NSO. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike for the second demo.
For this demo, I've got a few more integrations set up. We're going to be demoing a VPN service across 2 sites. So to do that, I wanted to make a bit more of a realistic approach. So if I go into System here, I can see, if I click into my adapters, I can see that in addition to the CFS and the RFS systems that I'm connected to from NSO, I've also got integrations set up into my PHP IPAM system, so I can do some IPAM allocation, as well as some ServiceNow integration. And then I've got my AAA again through the LDAP system. So in order to provision this, what we've decided to do, instead of using the Itential service catalog, is provision this from a ServiceNow northbound integration. So I'll go ahead and just fill out a bit of information here. I'll call this my VPN. I'll choose a description. This is my VPN, and I'll choose sites to connect this. We'll go ahead and leave the defaults here, doing a VPN between Arlanda and Berlin. This is my A side, and you know what, this is my Z side. Now, as far as the options go, we'll open up the verification, meaning we want to stop at all those manual tasks along the way. This goes back to that crawl, walk, run. Some operators like to see some of the approval steps before they provision it, so we'll go ahead and open those up. We'll go ahead and open up the 2-way integration, saying that we need to make sure that change request has been approved in ServiceNow before we actually do the provisioning step. And we'll go ahead and open up, making sure that this goes through a commit queue in NSO. Clicking on Order Now, I'll create my request, doing my ServiceNow bits, jumping into my request item, changing the state of this to work in progress. As soon as I do that and click Save, it's going to provision that through the API into the Itential platform, and I now get back a job ID associating to that request item. So now if I click back into my demo server and I go into Active Jobs here, I'm able to see that new service request. So clicking into it, I'll jump into the Visualize tab. Now right away we can see this is a more complex workflow. I've got some green boxes, blue boxes, and purple boxes. Again, the green ones are the network intelligent automated tasks. Those will run automatically on their own. The blue ones I've reserved for any sort of manual verification steps or some fallout. Those are the ones that are manually worked. And then we've got a bunch of purple boxes on the screen here. Those are our low code tasks. What those do for the users are they help when the user understands what they're trying to do without having to be a developer. So my users can write simple queries, merge data together. They can do things like a for loop. So for each site that we have on this VPN, they're able to loop through this process here and then proceed on. So again, just like everything else within Itential, low code, drag and drop, easy to use and easy to onboard your new workflow developers. So what we've done so far in this process, just to give you a quick high level, we've taken those integrations and we've reduced that swivel chair motion. So we started out by opening a change request into ServiceNow. So even though this request came from ServiceNow, we decided that, you know what, we need to follow our process. We'll open a change request in ServiceNow. So here's the information we sent to ServiceNow. Here's the information we got back from ServiceNow, saying that that change request number has been created. Then we've gone ahead and done some pre-checks, because before we can do our VPN, we need to make sure that the pre-checks have been completed. So we've got a pre-check template that we've gone ahead and executed. As long as that's passed, which it has, we can tell by it's following the green track, there was no reason to stop in those failure steps. Next, we've assigned some inventory from our database. And then we've gone ahead and done our for loop. So for each site, we decided we needed a subnet to associate to each site on that VPN, one for Arlanda and one for Berlin. Once those have been associated, we pushed them into an array, and we took that data and we constructed our payload for NSO. Once we got the service options set up, we made sure everything was in sync. By the way, this purple task here is a task that executes child jobs. So instead of having to Instead of having to capture all of your workflow items on a single workflow, you can embed some more modular components and then reuse that activities in parent jobs. What we've done now is this same test instance task. So this was the dry run here. We passed in our cumulative amount of data for all of the legs that we needed for that service, and then we passed it in here and we got back the dry run for that service. Since I said I wanted to view the steps and do that crawl, walk, run, this evaluation decision waited at that blue box here. So I'll go back into details, and again, provided I have the proper permissions, which I do, I can work that task. So here we can see, since this is implemented on top of an LSA environment, I can see that the RFS will have these changes in its netconf format. I can see that my PE devices will have this configuration and that configuration, and my CEs that I chose for my VPN will have these bits of configuration. Everything looks good, so I'll go ahead and approve that change. So now what we're doing is we're waiting for that change request approval. So it's going to pop up a task for me here saying, hey, we need to wait for this change request to be approved. What I've got built into the workflow is a checking mechanism that if I try to proceed through here, it's going to go back into ServiceNow and say, hey, has that request been approved? If it hasn't been approved, it's going to pop back open, and we can see that by iteration 2. So what I need to do is to go into ServiceNow and make sure that's been approved. So I'll go into my change, 439 right here for my request for L3 VPN, and I'll go ahead and work this change. What I can do first here is set the state to assess, save that. I'll go down and mark this as approved. Okay, now that it's been approved, I can just implement that change. And as soon as I click implement, this is making another API call back into Itential. We can see here right away, even though that was a manual step, it's gone ahead and worked that task for us. Clicking on visualize, I can jump in. It looks like we're now sitting on that provision step here. So we're provisioning the L3 VPN, and provided that everything goes well in the provisioning process, we'll keep going. It's finishing the change request in ServiceNow. We'll go to our post checks, executing another template of show commands, just verifying that everything is correct. It'll take that pre-post difference data and it'll open up this task since I said I wanted to pause on the verifications. Going back in here, I'll hit work task. So here I can see the show commands that were entered. I can see the maximum amount of data provided, or I can look at the minimal diff here and just see the differences in data. So this is where we've got a lot of operations users that execute these changes and they do these pre and post checks, but right now this is still a bit of manual activity. So leveraging the Itential platform and integrating in with NSO here, we're taking advantage of the live exec commands. This live exec capability allows us to run these checks, and we're able to do this and present this data back to the users so that the users don't have to sit there, copy and paste these commands going into the box one at a time, and they're able to actually increase the amount of verifications they do because of the simplicity here and because of how easy it is to build out these templates in Itential, create additional pre-post checks, run through this, and confirm that everything is good. Now I've showed you the manual process here. We also have automated tasks that they can build into different rules, and based on those rules they can identify if the changes were valid or not, and if these commands, the results from the commands are successful or failed. So with a quick glance in here, I don't see any issues. I'll go ahead and click proceed. As soon as that finishes, I'll click on visualize just to see where I am in the flow. Looks like the workflow is already finished. I can tell that by these top tasks over there marked out in gray. Looks like it's closed out the change request in ServiceNow. So that completes my provisioning of the L3 VPN service.
Thanks, Mike. As we look to wrap up the webinar, we just wanted to focus and at least give a visual of what we've talked about during the demonstrations, in the sense that the end-to-end automation takes up much more than just the execution or the change within the network. There's typically a lot of prep work. We estimate about 70% of the overall work effort that goes into a network change is in the prep work, whether that's approval processes, change request system interactions, validating a lot of resources, making sure the device is in a certain state, Obviously, the change is critically important, and from an Itential standpoint, we look to make those changes through platforms like Cisco's NSO or other DevOps platforms. And then ultimately, we have follow-up tasks. So a lot of that is either documenting what we've changed or comparing some of our prep work to our follow-up tasks. So we want to make sure we have the concept of when we talk about automation, we're talking about automating the entire process and not necessarily just the execution that is being done by DevOps platforms, controllers, and orchestrators. So with that, we're wrapping up for the webinar. Obviously, from an Itential standpoint, we're focused on being extremely physical. So the processes you saw are independent of whether it's a physical or virtual or cloud type of concept. With a lot of the interactions with some of the more complex components of NSO, you can see it's scalable and powerful. And then we adapt to a lot of NetOps and DevOps concepts within the platform. So the expectation is that the platform is extremely agile and will fit into your existing NetOps and DevOps processes. So with that, it brings us to our Q&A. We're available via email and a variety of online mechanisms. Please reach out to us with any questions. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.